There's a moment each night, just a breath between thought and nothing, where your mind lets go. You don't realize it's happening. You never remember the exact second. But in that moment, something disappears. You, your name, your memories, your problems, gone. Not erased, just paused. It's the softest exit. One that doesn't need a door. What if I told you that every night you experience the closest thing to death without dying? Not metaphorically, not poetically, but neurologically, spiritually, psychologically. You vanish, and each morning you resurrect. Tonight, you and I are going to explore that mystery together. Not to scare you, not to disturb you, but to show you that what you think of as sleep might be the single most overlooked spiritual and philosophical experience in your life. From the ancient Greeks to Buddhist monks, from modern neuroscience labs to out-of-body near-death reports, we'll uncover how sleep teaches us to let go, and how it may be preparing us for something far beyond dreaming. So lie back. Close your eyes if you haven't already. And if your eyes are open, soften your gaze. Let your breath slow. This is your time. You don't have to think. You don't have to do. You don't even have to be. Just listen. Let's begin. Part 1. The first death, surrendering the self. There's a reason why sleep is described as falling. You don't walk into sleep. You drop. You collapse into it. Like slipping under the surface of a still lake, your awareness sinks, pulled down by a force that's both gentle and undeniable. The ancient Greeks saw sleep and death as brothers, Hypnos and Thanatos, born of the night, winged and silent. Sleep was not the enemy of life, but its quiet twin. The Greeks weren't alone. Nearly every ancient culture had some version of this relationship. Why? Because when you sleep, you disappear. Not just to others, but to yourself. Let's begin by truly contemplating that mystery. Not from a scientific standpoint, not yet, but from a lived one. Every night, billions of people voluntarily lay down, dim the lights, and submit to an experience they don't control. We build entire cultures around the fear of death, yet casually dive into a process that mimics it each night. You may remember climbing into bed, scrolling on your phone, or turning off the lamp. You remember adjusting your pillow, listening to distant sounds, maybe having a few final thoughts about tomorrow's responsibilities. Then, nothing. A blank, a cut. And then somewhere, somehow, you return. It's morning. You feel groggy or refreshed. You rise, stretch, and begin anew. But what happened during that blankness? What part of you was alive, if the part that thinks and knows wasn't present? This daily gap, this disappearance, is not a glitch. It is a feature. It is built into the architecture of our minds. Let's talk about that. The idea that you are a consistent self, a solid, unbroken identity, is a comforting story. But most modern neuroscientists agree. It's a story. You are a process, not a thing. A continuous reassembly of thoughts, memories, habits, and sense impressions. And sleep. Sleep breaks that loop. Thomas Metzinger, a leading philosopher of consciousness, argues that the self is not a thing we possess, but a simulation we experience. He calls it the phenomenal self model. It is how the brain makes meaning from a chaotic universe. And when that model turns off, as it does in deep sleep, the illusion vanishes. In this way, sleep does not just rest the body. It suspends the identity. In Buddhist philosophy, particularly the concept of anatta, or non-self, this idea is central. The self, they say, is an illusion. The more we cling to it, the more we suffer. In deep meditation, monks seek to dissolve the ego, to reach a state of no mind. But in sleep, this happens naturally, effortlessly. The self simply lets go. And maybe that's why sleep feels so good, not only because it refreshes us, but because it offers a rare experience of non-attachment, of peace without identity. Awareness is not binary. It's not just on or off. Between waking and sleep is a liminal zone, hypnagogia. It's here you might see flashes of light, hear imagined voices, or feel yourself fall through space. This isn't dreamland. It's the corridor to it. In this state, the ego begins to loosen. The brain begins to uncouple its usual logic. You may encounter surreal images. A hand reaching through a wall, a conversation with someone long gone, a strange floating sensation. This is the descent. Your narrative begins to dissolve. You're no longer in full control. And when you finally reach stage 3 non-REM sleep, the deepest, most restorative kind, you're functionally gone. Delta waves, slow, high-amplitude brain waves, dominate this stage. Your senses are blocked out. Your body is immobile. Your temperature drops. Your brain, paradoxically, becomes cleaner, literally. The glymphatic system activates, flushing toxins and waste products. Your cells regenerate. Your memories consolidate. But your consciousness? Nowhere to be found. It's not just unconsciousness. It's non-being. This is what we call the first death. And yet, we welcome it. Every day, without question. We crave it when it's missing. We feel unwell, off-center, even desperate when we go without it. Extended sleep deprivation leads to psychological unraveling. The mind begins to hallucinate. Thought fragments. Identity flickers. In extreme cases, sleep loss becomes fatal. Sleep is not optional. It is necessary for survival. And what makes this even more mysterious is that the part of us we think of as essential, our consciousness, is the part that vanishes during the most important stages of sleep. It's as though the body needs to shut down the self in order to heal. That's profound, because if the self isn't needed to sustain life, what exactly is it for? Ancient philosophies tackled this paradox. In the Republic, Plato suggests that what we see with our eyes is only a shadow of the real world. The body, he says, distracts the soul from truth. In sleep, and eventually in death, the soul is freed. The self dissolves so that the deeper truth can emerge. In Hindu thought, the Mandukya Upanishad speaks of the 4 states of consciousness: waking, dreaming, deep sleep, and turiya, the transcendent state. In deep sleep, the ego vanishes. There are no desires, no fears, no dualities. And in turiya, one becomes fully aware of that deep stillness. It is not the end of the self. It is the awareness that exists beyond the self. We brush against this experience nightly, even if we don't notice. Even in the West, mystics and theologians have described sleep as a sacred return. St. John of the Cross spoke of the dark night of the soul, a state where the ego is eclipsed so that divine union can be experienced. This wasn't despair, it was purification. And again, It mirrors what happens in our beds each night. Now let's bring it forward. Think of a time you slept so deeply you forgot everything. No dreams, no memories, just blankness. And yet you woke up feeling more yourself than before. Why? Because you weren't cluttered. You weren't busy holding together the story of you. You were allowed, for just a moment, to be no one. And yet you returned. That's the quiet miracle of sleep. It takes us away, but it gives us back. So why fear death? Perhaps what we fear isn't death, but the idea of not waking up. But every night you prove that the deepest kind of surrender doesn't end you. It resets you. The question becomes not, what if I die in my sleep? But what if I finally rest deeply enough to remember who I am without the story? Sleep is the first death, and still, every morning, you rise. But let's not mistake this daily cycle for something passive. What happens during sleep isn't just a natural shutdown. It's a biological ritual, one that's essential to life, and perhaps to understanding death itself. Sleep forces humility upon us. No matter your intellect, your responsibilities, your ambitions, eventually, your body will override it all. It will drag you into rest whether you want it or not. And it's in this submission that something powerful is revealed. We are not the masters of our awareness. We are participants, borrowers of consciousness, not owners. It may sound unsettling, but there's liberation in this. What if you're not responsible for maintaining your identity every second? What if the deeper version of you doesn't need to think or act at all? This brings us to an important parallel: sleep and trust. When you fall asleep, you let go of control. You trust that your body will keep breathing, that your heart will keep beating, that the world will still be there when you wake. It is one of the most radical acts of trust we perform, nightly, without thinking. And this trust extends into the unknown. Because even though we've defined the sleep stages, measured brain waves and mapped circadian rhythms, there's still something we don't fully understand. Why we need to lose consciousness to survive. Evolution rarely favors vulnerability, and sleep is the most vulnerable state imaginable. For hours you're defenseless, unresponsive, unaware. In the wild, this could be fatal. Yet every animal, mammals, birds, even some fish, sleeps. Nature has deemed this risky behavior necessary. Why? The answer may lie not in survival of the body, but the survival of the mind. The mind, like a muscle, requires intervals of non-use, of deep repair. It needs time away from stimuli, from narrative, from identity. It needs stillness, and stillness, as it turns out, isn't nothing. It is a rich, fertile space where new clarity can emerge. Let's return to that metaphor. Death. Death is often imagined as a final stillness, an end, a void. But what if we've misunderstood that void? What if it's not an absence, but a pause? A silent moment between notes, a rest that gives meaning to the music. Sleep shows us how valuable that pause can be. In a culture obsessed with productivity, where being conscious equals being worthwhile, sleep teaches us that it's okay, essential even, to stop. To not think, to not know, to simply be, or to not be. And that is the paradox we face. We fear death because we cannot imagine a world without ourselves in it. Yet we experience that very absence every night, and not only survive it, but benefit from it. That's not just biological, that's philosophical, that's spiritual. When the French philosopher Michel de Montaigne wrote, "Can we be afraid of anything so often and so regularly as sleep?" he was hinting at something profound. The rhythms of sleep mirror the rhythms of mortality. They show us that endings are not unnatural. They are built into our design. And perhaps this is why dreams exist, to soften the fall. But that, dreams, imagination, and the surreal territory of inner vision, is a journey of its own. And it's one we'll explore deeply. For now, remember this. Each night, you surrender your identity, your story, your control. You die in the gentlest, kindest way possible. And yet, without fail, you rise again. Not because you fight to, but because you've learned to let go. This is the first death, and this too is life. But let's not mistake this daily cycle for something passive. What happens during sleep isn't just a natural shutdown. It's a biological ritual, one that's essential to life, and perhaps to understanding death itself. Sleep forces humility upon us. No matter your intellect, your responsibilities, your ambitions, eventually, your body will override it all. It will drag you into rest whether you want it or not. And it's in this submission that something powerful is revealed. We are not the masters of our awareness. We are participants, borrowers of consciousness, not owners. It may sound unsettling, but there's liberation in this. What if you're not responsible for maintaining your identity every second? What if the deeper version of you doesn't need to think or act at all? This brings us to an important parallel: sleep and trust. When you fall asleep, you let go of control. You trust that your body will keep breathing, that your heart will keep beating, that the world will still be there when you wake. It is one of the most radical acts of trust we perform, nightly, without thinking. And this trust extends into the unknown, because even though we've defined the sleep stages, measured brain waves, and mapped circadian rhythms, there's still something we don't fully understand. Why we need to lose consciousness to survive. Evolution rarely favors vulnerability, and sleep is the most vulnerable state imaginable. For hours, you're defenseless, unresponsive, unaware. In the wild, this could be fatal. Yet every animal, mammals, birds, even some fish, sleeps. Nature has deemed this risky behavior necessary. Why? The answer may lie not in survival of the body, but the survival of the mind. The mind, like a muscle, requires intervals of non-use, of deep repair. It needs time away from stimuli, from narrative, from identity. It needs stillness. And stillness, as it turns out, isn't nothing. It is a rich, fertile space where new clarity can emerge. Let's return to that metaphor. Death. Death is often imagined as a final stillness, an end, a void. But what if we've misunderstood that void? What if it's not an absence but a pause, a silent moment between notes, a rest that gives meaning to the music? Sleep shows us how valuable that pause can be. In a culture obsessed with productivity, where being conscious equals being worthwhile, sleep teaches us that it's okay, essential even, to stop, to not think, to not know, to simply be, or to not be. And that is the paradox we face. We fear death because we cannot imagine a world without ourselves in it. Yet we experience that very absence every night, and not only survive it, but benefit from it. That's not just biological, that's philosophical, that's spiritual. When the French philosopher Michel de Montaigne wrote, "Can we be afraid of anything so often and so regularly as sleep?" he was hinting at something profound. The rhythms of sleep mirror the rhythms of mortality. They show us that endings are not unnatural, they are built into our design. And perhaps this is why dreams exist, to soften the fall. But that, dreams, imagination, and the surreal territory of inner vision, is a journey of its own, and it's one we'll explore deeply. For now, remember this. Each night, you surrender your identity, your story, your control. You die, in the gentlest, kindest way possible. And yet, without fail, you rise again. Not because you fight to, but because you've learned to let go. This is the first death. And this too is life. But before we close this chapter, consider one last reflection. One that lives at the edge of science, mysticism, and the soul. In recent years, studies in neuroscience and spiritual psychology have begun to converge on one strange fact. The human brain in deep sleep begins to mirror brain states observed in deep meditation. Monks in long-term retreat who are hooked up to EEG monitors exhibit similar brainwave patterns to those in stage 3 sleep: slow, steady, rhythmic, and deeply synchronized. But unlike the average sleeper, these monks remain aware during those states. They describe the experience as being awake in a sea of silence, not thinking, not feeling, not even dreaming, just existing, purely, passively, peacefully. Could this be what the Upanishads call Turiya? Could it be what mystics mean when they speak of the divine silence? If so, then the first death isn't just a metaphor, it's a gateway, a glimpse of something we barely understand, and yet it's available to us every night. We may not all be monks, we may not reach awareness within the sleep state, but we can begin by respecting it, by approaching sleep not as an inconvenience, but as a sacred return, a dissolving of the noise, a rehearsal for release. Sleep is where the body rests, but the soul might remember. And in the simple act of surrendering, of closing your eyes, letting go, and allowing the self to fade, you participate in something eternal. Not ending, but beginning. Part 2. Dissolving the identity. Let us return now to a simple yet radical question. Who are you, really? When we speak of identity, we often speak in terms of continuity. You are the same person you were yesterday. You have the same name, the same body, the same memories. You recall your past and anticipate your future. This feeling of being someone, a self, feels unshakably real. But this continuity is a fragile illusion. In truth, you are not a single, unchanging entity. You are a stream, a story, a process constantly rewritten by experience. And nowhere is that more evident than in sleep. Sleep, particularly deep sleep, is not just the shutting off of external input. It's the suspension of self. Every thought that defines you, your preferences, your relationships, your memories, disappears. For hours they are simply gone. So who remains? In deep sleep, the brain's default mode network, responsible for self-referential thinking, is inactive. There is no inner dialogue, no mental eye observing and commenting, no storytelling voice. During this time, your identity dissolves, and yet, you don't die. You don't vanish into oblivion. You continue. Something endures. But it is not the you that thinks. It is something quieter, something prior. This idea that the self is not fixed has been echoed in ancient traditions. In the teachings of the Buddha, the self is not a permanent soul, but a cluster of changing phenomena, thoughts, emotions, sensations, and consciousness. These arise and pass away moment by moment. The self is not a thing, but an event. To grasp this is to begin dissolving the identity. In meditation practices across cultures, practitioners seek to observe the mind closely enough to notice this illusion. Thoughts come and go. Emotions rise and fall. With enough stillness, one notices that behind all these fluctuations, there is no stable self, just witnessing. Sleep accomplishes the same thing, without effort. When we sleep, particularly in dreamless states, the illusion disappears. There is no actor, no observer, just silence. And this is the remarkable truth. Identity is not needed for being. You do not need a name, a history, or a personality to exist. This can be terrifying or freeing. Most of us cling to our identity tightly. We curate it, defend it, build careers around it, seek validation for it. But sleep shows us that life goes on just fine without it. When you awaken, you return to your story. You remember your name, your plans, your personality. But something has changed. A reset has occurred. This nightly reset has psychological and emotional value. Sleep disorders are increasingly linked with mental illness, not simply because of biological disruption, but because of the loss of that psychic cleansing, this chance to dissolve the ego, to pause the narrative. Let's explore the dream state now. Dreams occur primarily during REM sleep, when the brain is highly active. During this time, identity becomes fluid. You might become someone else. You might be multiple people, or none at all. Time is non-linear. Logic breaks down. Emotional intensity rises. The dreaming mind does not care about realism. It cares about symbols, emotions, and subconscious content. It weaves meaning from chaos. In dreams, the identity is playful, elastic. Sometimes you might realize you're dreaming. This is known as lucid dreaming. And in these moments you experience a profound duality. You are both the character and the observer. You become aware of your own illusion. This awareness is a kind of awakening. Some say lucid dreaming is the training ground for death, because it teaches you how to remain aware while letting go. In Tibetan Buddhism, practitioners study dream yoga, a practice that uses lucid dreams to confront the subconscious and prepare for the after-death state. They believe that by mastering the dream state, one can navigate the bardo, the intermediate realm between death and rebirth, with clarity. So dreams, far from being random, can be doors, opportunities to see ourselves more clearly, to question who we are when the narrative loosens. And yet, even in dreams, we still cling to fragments of identity. We often interpret them from our waking ego's perspective. I dreamt that I did this. I saw this. But in truth, those stories are not written by the self. They are written by the deeper mind. What is this deeper mind? Carl Jung called it the collective unconscious, a vast ocean of symbols and archetypes shared by all humanity. In dreams, we dip into that ocean. We borrow characters, images, emotions. We create stories that don't just reflect us, but reflect our species, our history, our mythology. In this way, sleep is not just personal. It is cosmic. It dissolves the boundary between me and everything else. The mystics of every culture speak of this dissolution. At the moment, the self is seen for what it is, a mask, a role, necessary in the world, but ultimately not real. And when the mask drops, what remains? Silence, awareness, presence, or perhaps not even that. Just being. Just is. The deeper lesson here is not just about sleep. It's about surrender. The identity we carry, our sense of I, is like a tight garment. It protects us, defines us, gives us structure. But it can also constrict. In sleep, we slip out of it. We hang it by the door, and for a while we become light, spacious, undefined. If you've ever woken from a dream feeling like someone else, or no one at all, you've touched this mystery. And even if you haven't, even if you only know sleep as silence, that silence is the truest freedom, because in that silence there is no judgment, no comparison, no regret, no fear of the future. There is only what is. This is why sleep, when seen clearly, is sacred. It is not just a biological necessity. It is a spiritual invitation. Every night, the universe offers you the chance to dissolve. And in that dissolving, you become whole. So, the next time you find yourself drifting into sleep, pause for a moment. Notice how your sense of self begins to blur, how thoughts unravel, how you stop needing to be someone. Welcome that. Let it happen. That is the dissolution. That is the practice. That is the return. But let's go even further. Dissolving the identity is not just something that happens in sleep or meditation. It's something that can be practiced, noticed, and integrated into waking life. Imagine how life would feel if you could move through the world with a lighter grip on your story, with less pressure to perform, defend, or perfect your sense of self. Some spiritual traditions speak of ego death not as an event, but as a way of living, a way of moving through the world without being bound by identity. The Zen master says, "Show me the face you had before your parents were born." It's a poetic way of asking, who are you without your name, your history, your beliefs? This question might feel impossible, but it's not. It points to something beyond words, something you already know in your bones every night when you surrender to sleep. In that surrender, you become the answer. Modern psychology supports this too. Therapists working with trauma often find that people feel stuck because their identity has become fused with their pain. They've been telling themselves the same story for so long, they can't imagine being anything else. But when people learn to loosen their grip on identity, to say, "I am not my trauma," or "I am not my anxiety," healing begins. Sleep performs that healing naturally. It interrupts the loop. Even on the most stressful days, sleep gives us a few hours of freedom, not just from the world, but from ourselves. Let's also look at identity in terms of memory. Neuroscience has shown us that memory is reconstructive, not archival. Every time you remember something, you're not pulling out a file, you're rewriting it. And so even your memories, the foundation of your identity, are fluid. If memory is unstable, then identity is too. During sleep, particularly in dreams, this instability becomes apparent. You dream you're in your childhood home, but it's also a spaceship. You talk to your father, but he looks like your friend. You recognize yourself, but you're someone else. Your brain doesn't resist these contradictions. It flows with them. This shows us that our waking insistence on coherence is optional. In sleep, the self is allowed to be fluid. In dreams, you are unbound. Artists and writers have long tapped into this fluidity. Salvador Dali famously said, "I don't do drugs, I am drugs." He explored dream imagery to dissolve the limits of the rational mind. Carl Jung kept a dream journal for decades, not to interpret the dreams rationally, but to meet himself in all his hidden forms. Jung described a process he called individuation, the integration of the conscious self with the unconscious. It's a way of becoming whole by facing the parts of ourselves we normally avoid. And sleep is part of that process. In dreams, the unconscious speaks. In sleep, the self is rebalanced. So identity doesn't vanish in sleep. It evolves. It softens. It returns to its source. Even language reflects this truth. We wake up not just from sleep, but from delusion. We lose ourselves in music, art, love. We let go to find peace. These metaphors speak to a deeper truth, that identity, while useful, is not the whole of who we are. And when we let it go, we don't disappear. We become free. Sleep teaches us this freedom. Every night it whispers, "You are not who you think you are. You are not your job, your achievements, your regrets. You are not even your name. You are the silence behind all of that." And that silence is not empty. It is full. It is alive. It is the canvas on which all experience is painted. When we sleep, we return to the canvas. And when we wake, we begin to paint again. When we sleep, we return to the canvas. And when we wake, we begin to paint again. But what about those who wake up not knowing who they are? Individuals with dissociative amnesia or Alzheimer's disease sometimes experience moments of complete identity loss. Their memories, associations, even names feel foreign. And yet, they remain conscious. They breathe, observe, and exist. The self has slipped away, but awareness continues. This tells us something radical. You don't need identity to be present. Awareness, at its core, doesn't require a character. In fact, when the character dissolves, a different kind of presence arises, a simpler one, a quieter one. Ramana Maharshi, the Indian sage, posed the question, "Who am I?" Not to elicit an answer, but to exhaust the mind of all its assumptions. Every label you use to answer, your name, your role, your nationality, your thoughts, eventually collapses under examination. What remains is stillness, not an answer, but a presence. And that stillness is what sleep returns us to every night. In many indigenous cultures, dreams are not personal illusions. They are shared experiences, messages from ancestors, or travels of the soul. The dreamer is not the author, but the vessel. This view reframes sleep entirely. It is not escape. It is participation in something larger than the individual mind. Even language gives this away. We say we fall asleep. Not climb, not step, not leap, but fall. It implies surrender, gravity, a descent into a deeper place. And yet, when we awaken, we say we rise. In this metaphor is a clue. Sleep mirrors death, but also rebirth. Identity dissolves and then reforms. Each day is a new version of you. Not metaphorically, but literally. Brain chemistry shifts, hormones change, new neural pathways are laid down. The person who opens their eyes in the morning is not identical to the one who closed them. So why do we fear losing ourselves? Maybe it's because we think there's only one of us to lose. But look at nature. The tree sheds its leaves to make room for new ones. The snake loses its skin. The moon disappears each cycle, only to be reborn. Identity, like everything else, is seasonal, cyclical, changing. Sleep reminds us of this. It gives us practice in letting go. And this practice is not small. It's preparation for change, for awakening, for life, for death. So tonight, when you lie down, see if you can feel it, the soft dissolving. Watch your mind as it begins to release its grip. Let your thoughts drift like clouds. Let the name you've worn all day begin to melt. You don't need it right now. Not here. Here, in this moment, you are no one. And that is not a loss. That is freedom. Because to be no one is to become everything. When we sleep, we return to the canvas. And when we wake, we begin to paint again. But what about those who wake up not knowing who they are? Individuals with dissociative amnesia or Alzheimer's disease sometimes experience moments of complete identity loss. Their memories, associations, even names feel foreign. And yet, they remain conscious. They breathe, observe, and exist. The self has slipped away, but awareness continues. This tells us something radical. You don't need identity to be present. Awareness, at its core, doesn't require a character. In fact, when the character dissolves, a different kind of presence arises. A simpler one, a quieter one. Ramana Maharshi, the Indian sage, posed the question, "Who am I?" Not to elicit an answer, but to exhaust the mind of all its assumptions. Every label you use to answer, your name, your role, your nationality, your thoughts, eventually collapses under examination. What remains is stillness, not an answer, but a presence. And that stillness is what sleep returns us to every night. In many indigenous cultures, dreams are not personal illusions. They are shared experiences, messages from ancestors, or travels of the soul. The dreamer is not the author, but the vessel. This view reframes sleep entirely. It is not escape. It is participation in something larger than the individual mind. Even language gives this away. We say we fall asleep. Not climb, not step, not leap, but fall. It implies surrender, gravity, a descent into a deeper place. And yet, when we awaken, we say we rise. In this metaphor is a clue. Sleep mirrors death, but also rebirth. Identity dissolves and then reforms. Each day is a new version of you, not metaphorically, but literally. Brain chemistry shifts, hormones change, new neural pathways are laid down. The person who opens their eyes in the morning is not identical to the one who closed them. So why do we fear losing ourselves? Maybe it's because we think there's only one of us to lose. But look at nature. The tree sheds its leaves to make room for new ones. The snake loses its skin. The moon disappears each cycle, only to be reborn. Identity, like everything else, is seasonal, cyclical, changing. Sleep reminds us of this. It gives us practice in letting go. And this practice is not small. It's preparation for change, for awakening, for life, for death. Let's also not forget the role identity plays in our waking suffering. Much of our anxiety comes from the pressure to perform a consistent self. We worry about being perceived a certain way, upholding a reputation, appearing successful. But who is this performance for? And who suffers when we forget our lines? Sleep doesn't judge you. It doesn't care who you are. It doesn't care what role you play. When you fall asleep, your nervous system doesn't ask for your resume. It simply does what it's always done. Carries you home. Home. Not to a place, but to a state. The state of no identity, no striving, no pretense, just being. There is also something to be said about dreams as emotional messengers. The self often hides pain during waking life, trauma, shame, guilt. But in dreams, these feelings surface. They are disguised as people, places, or impossible situations. Your dream may not make sense, but your psyche knows what it's doing. It's showing you what needs to be felt. Dreams help deconstruct the false self, the person who is always fine, the person who doesn't cry, the person who's always in control. In the dream, that person might fall apart, and that is sacred. Because only by falling apart can we see what was never necessary in the first place. When we re-emerge from sleep, we often feel refreshed, not just because of chemical restoration, but because a part of us has had space to be honest, to fall, to be held by the darkness instead of constantly holding it back. So the deeper we go into this nightly unraveling, the more we might ask, what would it be like to bring that softness into the day? To walk into a room and not need to be anyone? To speak without rehearsing? To listen without filtering? This is not loss. This is clarity. The clearest water is the one that allows the mud to settle. Sleep is that settling. The self stirs up sediment all day. But at night it sinks, and what remains is a kind of internal stillness we rarely touch while awake. And that stillness? That's you too. So tonight, when you lie down, see if you can feel it, the soft dissolving. Watch your mind as it begins to release its grip. Let your thoughts drift like clouds. Let the name you've worn all day begin to melt. You don't need it right now. Not here. Here, in this moment, you are no one. And that is not a loss. That is freedom. Because to be no one is to become everything. Part 3. The biological near death. What happens inside your body when you sleep is nothing short of miraculous, and perhaps a little unsettling, because biologically speaking, falling asleep mimics dying in more ways than most of us realize. Let's begin with the basics. When you drift into sleep, your heart rate slows, your body temperature drops, Muscle activity reduces. Breathing becomes shallow and rhythmic. Brain waves shift from rapid beta frequencies to slower alpha and then theta, until finally, in deep sleep, they enter delta, slow, synchronized, and wide. This neurological descent is the brain's version of powering down. But if you look at these changes in isolation, lower heart rate, slower breathing, unresponsiveness to the external world, it closely resembles the first stages of clinical death. Your body is no longer reacting to most external stimuli. Consciousness fades. Voluntary movement stops. The lines between sleep and death begin to blur. There's a reason anesthesiologists refer to general anesthesia as putting you under. The state induced is so close to deep sleep and death that it takes trained professionals to navigate its razor-thin margins. And interestingly, both anesthesia and natural sleep activate similar regions of the brain, particularly the thalamus and brainstem. So in a sense, each night, you practice dying. But this isn't morbid. It's natural. It's beautiful. And it reveals how life builds resilience by rehearsing its own undoing. Just like dreams help us confront hidden fears, sleep prepares the body and mind for surrender, not in fear, but in flow. Let's talk about the hypnagogic state, the transition from wakefulness to sleep. This is often marked by strange sensations, falling, flashing lights, sudden muscle jerks, or even the brief perception of sounds or voices. Some people experience vivid hallucinations. Neurologists have found that this stage closely resembles the disorientation experienced by those emerging from near-death experiences. Now consider REM sleep, rapid eye movement. During this stage, your body becomes paralyzed by a neurological mechanism known as REM atonia. This prevents you from acting out your dreams. Your brain, meanwhile, lights up like it's fully awake. In fact, in some brain scans, the activity during REM is more intense than when you're conscious. So the body lies still, unresponsive, as the mind becomes vividly alive. Again, death-like stillness, paired with mental vibrancy. It's a paradox. You appear the most dead when your mind is most awake. Many cultures have noticed this similarity. Ancient Egyptians believed that the soul left the body during sleep and traveled through other realms, returning upon waking. Indigenous tribes across the Americas share similar beliefs, often seeing dreams as proof of life beyond the body. Even in modern accounts of near-death experiences, NDEs, survivors describe journeys not unlike lucid dreams, vivid colors, timelessness, sensations of floating or flying, encountering otherworldly beings. Some scientists have hypothesized that the same neurochemicals active during REM sleep, like DMT, melatonin, and acetylcholine, are also triggered during death or trauma. This leads us to an incredible possibility, that the dream state is not a metaphor for death. It is a training ground for it. When we sleep, we are rehearsing how to let go, how to release control, how to surrender to the unknown. And unlike death, sleep offers us the grace of return. Each morning, we reawaken, but not as carbon copies of yesterday. Sleep rewires us. It cleans up the brain's waste through the glymphatic system. It reorganizes memories. It recalibrates hormones. During deep NREM sleep, the brain shrinks slightly to allow cerebrospinal fluid to flush out toxins, an internal cleansing that may even protect against neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's. This biological housekeeping happens mostly during the hours we're most still, just as if the body waits for identity and thought to step aside so it can repair what ego cannot. In those hours, we are closest to our unfiltered nature, not as thinkers, not as doers, but as organisms, as awareness cradled in biology. And that awareness, stripped of language and role, might be the closest thing we ever experience to the pure presence described by mystics, monks, and meditators. When NDE survivors describe seeing the light or feeling universal love, perhaps it's not evidence of the supernatural, but an encounter with the deepest, most radiant state the brain can access when the ego collapses and identity disappears. That state. You visit it nightly. Sleep isn't just rest. It's rehearsal. It's healing. It's a nightly journey into death so that we may wake with softer eyes. Let's consider another strange phenomenon: sleep paralysis. You wake up in the middle of the night and find yourself unable to move. You're aware, conscious, yet frozen. Many report sensing a presence in the room, sometimes accompanied by hallucinations. It's terrifying, but also revealing. This transitional state blurs the line between REM and wakefulness. It shows us what it feels like to exist without control, an uncanny echo of being trapped in your body during a near-death state. Researchers say this state results from waking up while REM atonia is still in effect. But others, spiritual traditions, folklore, believe it is a glimpse into the astral world, a view from the threshold. In Tibetan Buddhism, the practice of dream yoga teaches that sleep is not just rest, it's a spiritual opportunity. Practitioners train themselves to become lucid in dreams so that they can practice mindfulness, compassion, and awareness even while the body sleeps. The ultimate goal is to maintain awareness through sleep, into death, and beyond, into the intermediate state known as the bardo. They believe that the way we sleep and the way we die are deeply intertwined. Even in Christianity, sleep is often used as a metaphor for death and resurrection. Those who sleep in Christ will awaken, says the scripture. In Islam, too, there is a belief that sleep is a form of death, and waking is like being brought back to life. Every tradition echoes the same idea. The boundary between sleeping and dying is thinner than we think. And it's not just ancient or religious texts that speak to this connection. Carl Jung, one of the most influential psychologists of the 20th century, spoke about dreams as messages from the unconscious and believed that confronting the unconscious during dream states could prepare the individual for the ultimate confrontation, death itself. Jung saw dreams as a rehearsal for the dissolution of the ego, a preview of the psyche's release from the body. Meanwhile, neuroscientists like Matthew Walker and Anil Seth explore the deep neurological processes during sleep as windows into consciousness. Seth argues that consciousness is a controlled hallucination, and during dreams, that control loosens, making us receptive to new experiences, including glimpses of what lies beyond conscious life. Consider the idea of ego death often described during psychedelic experiences. Substances like psilocybin and DMT mimic the natural chemicals in our brain and dissolve the sense of I. Users describe becoming one with everything, seeing their life as a story, feeling bathed in light. These states mirror the near-death experience, and in many ways mimic deep dreaming. So again, the connection deepens. Dream, death, and ego dissolution are not separate. They may be three faces of the same doorway. Every night you approach that door, and every morning you step back. And perhaps the true gift of sleep is this gentle rhythm, a reminder that dissolution isn't something to dread. It is part of renewal, part of growth. It's what allows us to begin again. In a world obsessed with productivity and permanence, sleep is the great equalizer. The powerful and the powerless, the old and the young, all surrender to it. And in doing so, we all touch the same truth: that control is an illusion and release is divine. So tonight, when your head sinks into the pillow, know that you are entering not just a biological cycle, but a sacred one that echoes with myths, dreams, and ancient wisdom. One that trains your body to rest, your mind to surrender, and your soul to let go. Because maybe dying isn't what we think it is. Maybe it's just another way of waking up. Because maybe dying isn't what we think it is. Maybe it's just another way of waking up. But let's take this even further. What if sleep not only mirrors death, but serves as a messenger between realms? Our daily invitation to loosen the grip of physical reality and glimpse the numinous. The liminal space of sleep is where the mind becomes fluid. Boundaries dissolve. Time stretches. The ego quiets. And in that sacred silence, something ancient stirs. Some traditions suggest that what we call dreaming is a diluted version of the afterlife, that when the soul slips free during slumber, it briefly enters the spaces between lives. Some mystics go further, arguing that sleep is not a function of biology alone, but a soul state, a state that restores not just memory and muscle, but meaning. The Kabbalists, for instance, describe sleep as the partial departure of the soul from the body. According to their texts, during sleep, a portion of the soul rises to higher spiritual realms to receive insight, healing, and renewal before returning. In that brief nightly exodus, we are said to reconnect with divine wisdom. Is that why dreams so often feel charged with emotion, symbolism, or strange clarity? Why we sometimes awaken with sudden revelations or feelings we can't explain? Even in the modern era, we use sleep as a metaphor for spiritual awakening. To be asleep is to be unconscious of your true nature. To awaken is to become aware, not just of the world, but of the illusion of separation, the illusion of permanence, and death. In this frame, death is not a failing. It's not a punishment. It's the ultimate awakening. Yet in our culture, death is hidden, feared, sanitized. Unlike sleep, which we accept as essential, death is viewed as unnatural, something to be fought, delayed, or denied. But what if we saw it as a continuation of the nightly process we already know so well? Just as dusk gives way to night, and night gives way to dawn, perhaps death is just a longer, deeper rest, one whose morning we do not yet remember. And perhaps those few who return, through near-death experiences, deep dreams or altered states, bring back whispers of that morning, the kind that echo in poetry, in myth, in music, the kind that remind us that even the end may be just another threshold. So when you sleep tonight, consider it a sacred act, a rehearsal not just for death, but for what lies beyond it, a return to the mystery, that holds us all. Because maybe dying isn't what we think it is. Maybe it's just another way of waking up. But let's take this even further. What if sleep not only mirrors death, but serves as a messenger between realms, our daily invitation to loosen the grip of physical reality and to glimpse the numinous? The liminal space of sleep is where the mind becomes fluid. Boundaries dissolve. Time stretches. The ego quiets. And in that sacred silence, something ancient stirs. Some traditions suggest that what we call dreaming is a diluted version of the afterlife, that when the soul slips free during slumber, it briefly enters the spaces between lives. Some mystics go further, arguing that sleep is not a function of biology alone, but a soul state, a state that restores not just memory and muscle, but meaning. The Kabbalists, for instance, describe sleep as the partial departure of the soul from the body. According to their texts, during sleep, a portion of the soul rises to higher spiritual realms to receive insight, healing, and renewal before returning. In that brief nightly exodus, we are said to reconnect with divine wisdom. Is that why dreams so often feel charged with emotion, symbolism, or strange clarity? Why we sometimes awaken with sudden revelations or feelings we can't explain? Even in the modern era, we use sleep as a metaphor for spiritual awakening. To be asleep is to be unconscious of your true nature. To awaken is to become aware, not just of the world, but of the illusion of separation, the illusion of permanence. And death? In this frame, death is not a failing. It's not a punishment. It's the ultimate awakening. Yet in our culture, death is hidden, feared, sanitized. Unlike sleep, which we accept as essential, death is viewed as unnatural, something to be fought, delayed, or denied. But what if we saw it as a continuation of the nightly process we already know so well? Just as dusk gives way to night, and night gives way to dawn, perhaps death is just a longer, deeper rest, one whose morning we do not yet remember. And perhaps those few who return, through near-death experiences, deep dreams or altered states, bring back whispers of that morning, the kind that echo in poetry, in myth, in music, the kind that remind us that even the end may be just another threshold. This perspective isn't just romantic or poetic. It has practical implications. If we begin to see death not as a fearsome finality, but as a return, a movement inward, we might live differently, with more grace, more ease, more attention to what really matters. We might take our nightly ritual of falling asleep as an act of reverence rather than routine. Consider the stories passed down from generations, of ancestors who visited loved ones in dreams, of dying people who spoke to those already gone, of children who seemed to recall lives they never lived. While science continues to seek empirical explanations, perhaps these moments serve as reminders that consciousness is more mysterious and layered than we dare to admit. Let's not forget the body in all this. As we sleep, the body doesn't just rest. It listens. It integrates. It heals. Our immune systems strengthen. Our muscles recover. Our emotional centers recalibrate. The amygdala, our brain's fear processor, is soothed during REM sleep, reducing reactivity and increasing resilience. In that sense, sleep doesn't only mimic death, it redeems it. It shows us that through stillness comes strength, that through letting go we are restored. This is echoed in traditions like Yoga Nidra, a form of conscious sleep meditation where the body falls into deep rest while the mind remains aware. Practitioners of Yoga Nidra describe feeling as if they've journeyed far beyond the limits of their physical bodies, touching states of consciousness that transcend time and identity. Some even call it the waking sleep of the soul. The fact that this practice exists in multiple forms across spiritual traditions, whether it's Sufi zikr, Christian contemplative prayer, Buddhist mindfulness of sleep, or indigenous dream rituals, reveals something universal. We have always been trying to understand the place where mind, body, and spirit dissolve into one. To look at sleep merely as a physical necessity is to miss its deeper role as a teacher. It teaches us about trust, vulnerability, surrender, and it offers us the most radical of all truths, that we are not our productivity, not our appearance, not our thoughts. We are the awareness that remains when all else fades. Death, then, is not a thief, it is a teacher, and sleep is its classroom. So when you sleep tonight, consider it a sacred act, a rehearsal not just for death, but for what lies beyond it, a return to the mystery that holds us all. Part 4. Dreams, Myths, and Cosmic Memory. What if every dream you've ever had wasn't random? What if it was a message, a memory, a portal? In this final chapter, we'll explore the idea that dreams are not just strange nocturnal stories, but echoes from something deeper, an ancient intelligence that connects us all. Let's begin with the myths. Across cultures, dreams have been revered as sacred. In ancient Mesopotamia, kings relied on dreams to make decisions. The Greeks believed dreams were messages from the gods. In Hindu scriptures, dreams are classified into categories, some arising from daily disturbances, and others seen as divine visions of truth. One of the oldest known texts about dreams is the Egyptian Dream Book, a papyrus scroll from 1279 BCE, listing dreams and their interpretations. To the ancient Egyptians, dreaming wasn't just a brain glitch, it was communication with the netherworld. Native American traditions, particularly among the Iroquois and Lakota people, speak of dreams as spiritual guides. Children are encouraged from a young age to remember and interpret their dreams. Dream catchers, now a commercialized item, originally symbolized this belief that dreams are real journeys of the soul, and we must protect and honor them. These beliefs may seem mystical, but there is a common thread. Dreams matter. They hold weight. They are more than neurological noise. They are part of how we access something beyond the veil. Modern science, too, has come around to recognizing the power of dreams. Freud called dreams the royal road to the unconscious. Jung believed dreams were communications from the collective unconscious, a shared reservoir of memories, symbols, and archetypes inherited from our ancestors. He spoke of recurring symbols in dreams, snakes, rivers, caves, not as quirks of imagination, but as messages from a deeper source trying to guide us. Now consider this. If dreams are fragments of a shared memory, then every night we dip into something bigger than ourselves, a sea of meaning, a cosmic archive, a place where the past, future, and timeless truths coexist. Have you ever dreamed of a place you've never been, but it felt familiar? Or met someone in a dream who felt more real than anyone you know in waking life? These moments hint at what some call cosmic memory, the idea that within us lies access to all knowledge, and that sleep is one of the few remaining doorways to reach it. Let's take a closer look at ancient dream temples. In Greece, dream healing was a practice known as incubation. People would travel to Asclepian temples, sacred spaces dedicated to the god of medicine. They would fast, pray, then sleep within the temple in hopes of receiving a healing dream. The priest-physicians would interpret the dreams and prescribe treatments based on them. These temples weren't fringe institutions. They were the hospitals of the ancient world, places where dreams weren't dismissed, but respected as the most direct language of the body and spirit. So why did we lose this wisdom? With the rise of modern rationalism and material science, dreams were demoted to the status of meaningless static, an accidental byproduct of neurons firing. But that view is slowly being replaced. Studies now show that dreams play a key role in emotional regulation, memory consolidation, and even problem-solving. In REM sleep, the brain doesn't just replay memories, it reshapes them. It weaves experiences into new patterns, helping us process grief, prepare for challenges, and tap into creativity. Think of it this way. In waking life, we gather data. In sleep, we interpret it. We give it meaning. Paul McCartney famously composed the melody for Yesterday in a Dream. Dmitri Mendeleev visualized the periodic table in a dream. Mary Shelley said the idea for Frankenstein came to her in a dream. The boundary between inspiration and revelation is often found in that twilight world. But what if we go even further? What if dreams not only reveal the mind, but shape it? What if they are a playground for the soul? Many lucid dreamers report the ability to fly, to pass through walls, to meet beings of light. These dreams don't just feel vivid, they feel more real than waking life. In Tibetan Buddhism, this isn't surprising. Practitioners of Mailam, the yoga of the dream state, train to become aware in dreams, using them to practice compassion, explore consciousness, and prepare for the moment of death. In this worldview, the dream body is a subtle body, a kind of intermediary between spirit and flesh, and the dream world is a dimension of its own, governed by different laws. When one becomes lucid, they're not just having a dream, they're stepping into a new layer of existence. Could this explain why dreams can carry emotional intensity far beyond their content? A single sentence in a dream can shake you. A glimpse of someone long gone can bring you to tears. A simple image, an open door, a glowing forest, a soundless voice can haunt you for years. These are not random. They are encounters. Encounters with what? With memory, with mystery, with parts of yourself that daily life has silenced, and maybe with something beyond the self entirely. Some dream researchers even speculate that dreams may be one of the few times the brain steps outside linear time. In dreams, you can relive childhood and skip to old age in a moment. You can feel days pass in minutes. If time is an illusion, as many physicists and philosophers argue, then dreams may be the one place where we experience reality more truly. Think of the dream as a rehearsal not just for life or death, but for timelessness. In some mystical traditions, dreams are believed to be the soul's return to its origin point, a nightly reunion with the eternal. And through this reunion, we're subtly changed, not always in ways we notice. But over time, we soften, we open, we awaken. Because dreams remind us that there's more to this world than meets the eye, that there are truths too delicate for daylight, but perfect for the hush of midnight, that maybe, just maybe, you are more than a body, more than a name, more than a single life. Maybe you are the dreamer, and maybe everything else is the dream. Maybe you are the dreamer, and maybe everything else is the dream. But what if dreams are more than inner experiences? What if they are also shared? Have you ever had a dream that someone else said they had too? Or woken up with an insight, only to discover someone close to you had a similar realization that night? These synchronicities suggest a possibility that dreamers are not isolated, but connected. Carl Jung proposed the idea of the collective unconscious, suggesting that beneath our personal memories lies a shared psychic substrate. Archetypes, recurring themes, even whole narratives. These may not be individual creations, but universal echoes. Dreams could be the mechanism by which these echoes surface. That's why we all dream of falling, flying, or being chased. Not because of personal trauma, but because we are dipping into a river that runs beneath all of us. Now imagine that river as more than metaphor. Indigenous Australian communities speak of the dream time, a sacred era when ancestral spirits shaped the world. To them, dreams are not just nighttime events. They are the dimension in which reality is continuously created. The waking world is a shadow of the dreaming, not the other way around. In this view, we're not people who dream. We are dreams who are briefly people. Even cutting-edge science begins to ask questions that sound strangely spiritual. Physicists exploring quantum entanglement have shown that particles light years apart appear to influence one another instantly. If such connection exists at the smallest scale of matter, might it also exist in consciousness? Could we be dreaming together? There's a growing field of research on mutual dreaming, where people deliberately attempt to meet in the same dream. While evidence is still anecdotal, the consistency of the reports, shared settings, similar conversations, identical symbols, suggests that dream space might be a co-created reality, a shared landscape we unconsciously build each night. This brings us to dream architecture, the idea that we shape our inner world much like we shape a video game map. Lucid dreamers often return to familiar locations, find entire cities recurring across months or years, or experience expansions of a place they once dreamed. Why do these geographies remain? Why are they stable? Could it be that dream consciousness has memory too? This stability implies something extraordinary, that our dream selves are continuous, that each night, even if we forget it upon waking, we continue a journey already begun. We are travelers in a land made of thought and emotion, where time flows differently, and the rules bend to meaning rather than mass. If dreams are journeys, then what are they preparing us for? Some traditions suggest the afterlife. In ancient Tibetan texts, the bardo, the space between death and rebirth, is described in language strikingly similar to dreams. Shape-shifting realms, intense emotions, symbolic landscapes, encounters with guides and mirrors of the self. What if the bardo is not just an idea of death, but an extension of the dream? Then dreams are not mere stories, they are previews. And just like sleep prepares us for the challenges of the day, dreams prepare us for the soul's great transition. So how do we listen better? How do we remember more? One way is through dream journaling, writing down dreams the moment you wake. This simple act teaches the mind to prioritize dream recall. Over time, fragments become full stories. Emotions become themes. Patterns emerge. Your subconscious begins to trust you, offering more clarity, more connection. Another method is meditation before sleep. When you quiet the mind before entering dreams, you increase your chance of lucidity. You carry awareness with you. You become an active participant rather than a passive witness. The more you remember, the more you realize that the dream realm isn't just an escape. It's a mirror, a teacher, and perhaps even a home. And then there is the most profound practice of all, to live as if the waking world is just another dream. Not in a nihilistic way, but in the way sages and mystics suggest, seeing life with curiosity, wonder, and reverence, recognizing that what we fear might be less real than what we imagine, that what we love may last longer than we believe. The dream is always waiting. Every night, the doorway opens, and we step through, not knowing where we'll land, but trusting that the journey matters, because maybe, just maybe, we don't sleep to forget. Maybe we sleep to remember. So here we are, at the edge of sleep, at the edge of death, at the edge of something eternal. We've wandered through ancient myths and neural networks, through ego and dream, through silence and memory. And all along, one message has repeated like a soft pulse beneath everything, that sleep is not the absence of life, but the return to something larger than life. What we call consciousness may just be the flicker of a lantern in a much larger night. And every time we fall asleep, we lower that lantern and step into the fullness of what we are. Not individuals bound by time, but fragments of a great, dreaming whole. In this final moment of reflection, consider this. If every night we lose our identity, our fears, our ambitions, and still awaken intact, who are we really? If we can experience death in tiny doses and survive it, maybe death itself is not what we thought. Maybe it's not an ending. Maybe it's a continuation. Maybe we are not here to conquer time, but to learn how to dissolve into it, to become like the river that remembers every stone as it touches it, even as it keeps moving, to become like the dream that knows its dreamer. The modern world rushes us toward constant activity. It praises the wakeful, the productive, the alert. But there is wisdom in stillness, in the pause, in the great exhale of sleep. Tonight, when you close your eyes, remember what you've learned. That sleep is sacred, that forgetting is part of remembering, that letting go is not the end. It is the beginning of everything real. And when you dream, know that you are not alone. You are swimming in a sea of stories. You are walking the same landscapes that prophets, poets, and ancestors have wandered before you. You die every night, and you are reborn with the dawn. Not weaker, not smaller, but wiser. Thank you for dreaming with me. Sleep deeper and sleep smart.